Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove. Taylor Rockwell is not with me today. He'll be back Sunday evening when we do our thumbs up, thumbs down review of the weekend. But today's show, today was going to be the day I was going to talk to Wes Burdine. So I did. Wes is the managing editor of FiftyFiveOne.com, a website focused on Minnesota soccer. So on today's show, we talk all about Minnesota United Football Club. But don't worry, if you're not a Minnesota fan, there's plenty in this show for you, I promise. It's a really good chat I had with Wes. He's a top guy. We also talk US men's national team, a loon that maybe Bruce Arena could take a look at. And we talk about the NASL and the decision that US Soccer seems to have made to not grant them Division 2 status for next season. We even get into a little bit of Pro-Rel. We talk about the pros and cons of the Oasis song Wonderwall, when to boo your team, why you shouldn't build an MLS roster from Scandinavia, all sorts of things. It's so good, I'm not even going to waste your time with any more preamble. Let's get straight to the interview. So, Wes Burdine, I finally got you on the show. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you guys and think you do fantastic work. So I appreciate it.
Right back at you. We've been trying to get you on for a little while and it hasn't worked out. But you're finally here and we've got lots to talk about. Yeah,
I mean it's been a crazy year for Minnesota and a crazy year for NASL as well. So
first question though is, what are you wearing? Because when I think of Dr. Wes Burdine, I've seen your Twitter avatar, and you're very well dressed. So is that how you roll every day, dressed to the nines?
No, I actually did have someone at a Minnesota United game the other day say comment on how underdressed I was, and I forget that a lot of the best photos that I have of me are like weddings or things like that. So so I don't teach college anymore. But when I did definitely play the stereotype with the tweed jacket. So I'll admit to that.
Elbow pads? Tell me there was elbow pads.
Yeah. Yes. Yesterday I actually wore elbow patches on my tweed jacket. So
lovely.
Yep.
All right. Up first, Wes, I want to talk about the US men's national team. And the reason I want to do that is because I'm very aware of the Total Soccer Show tends to be just me and Taylor sitting in a room talking to each other. And I really want to make an effort to get outside perspectives, right? So we had Rob Usry, we had Bobby Warshaw. Now I want to get you because you're a guy whose take I trust. So without going sort of too deep into the game, what's your take on the sort of loss at home to Costa Rica and the loss away to Honduras? Are you panicking? Are you sort of worried? Or are you one of those guys that's like, it's the Hex, it'll be okay?
I think Honduras worried me a little bit more. I thought Costa Rica was just fantastic against us, and the way that they just shut down the game. I thought we actually didn't play that terribly. We were a bit unlucky. So when I watch
you're with Bobby Warshaw.
Yeah, I'm always with Bobby. I'm actually Team Bobby. Games like that, you just feel unlucky, right? Games like Honduras, they just looked terrible, and there's all the excuses that make sense about the they were playing on a cow pasture. It's 1,000,000 degrees outside. People have rifles in the stands pointed at them, whatever it is. But
wait, was that last part true? I didn't know about that.
No. I'm sorry.
That would be the ultimate excuse, right?
yeah. Then I think they would be excused then. But the fact is, it's not going to get easier, right? Panama is still a good team. Trinidad and Tobago away is still going to be a difficult game, but I'm not wearing sackcloth. I think that it'll happen. Mexico also was terrible last qualifier cycle, and they had a great World Cup.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit more even keel about it.
And I think, as we get further away in time, as it goes into the rearview mirror, the last couple of games, I start to see the bigger picture, and I'm thinking sort of, if we just, as long as we get through this, we'll kind of forget about this and we'll just be focused on who we've been drawn in with the group and all that sort of stuff, and it'll be kind of forgotten.
Yeah, and the fact is, we all knew that there still are problems, and thankfully Klinsmann is gone so that we can stop just blaming it all on him, and we can start focusing on other things like
blaming on Bruce Arena.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, the other thing I want to talk to you about, Wes, is Minnesota United, which I know is not how you pronounce it, Minnesota United Football Club. I haven't followed them, obviously, anywhere near as closely as you have. So some of my questions are going to be kind of novice level, if that's going to be okay with you.
No problem.
First question, I'm assuming Minnesota have no mathematical chance of making the playoffs this season. Am I correct in that?
I think they actually have mathematical chance, but
wow.
math might be the only thing in their favor. I mean, they're only they're 9 points back from Real Salt Lake, who are in I believe 8th, right? So it is extremely unlikely, and I believe they only have 3 more home games, and they've only won 1 game away. So math is the only thing that allows any hope,
and it'd have to be some Matt Damon Goodwill Hunting math to get it.
Yeah, exactly, right. yeah. Someone wrote it up on the chalkboard, and I don't think many Minnesota fans thought that we were going to make the playoffs this year anyway. So I don't think it's dire or anything for those reasons. I think that it's largely, when people think about this team and how we're doing it's evaluating whether or not we feel like we're going in a good direction, or we're putting in good performances week in and week out.
So, I mean, I guess that's the question then, right? If people accept that maybe no playoffs this year, sort of Matt Damon accepted, do people feel like the team has an upward trajectory? Because from my sort of very outside perspective, it started really badly, right? I remember thinking maybe they should fire Adrian Heath after the first couple of games. There were some big number defeats. There's a defence that looked sort of like it was going to be easily overrun all year. And just looking at results and the occasional clips I've seen, it seems like things aren't anywhere near as bad as it was. But has it changed enough for you to feel kind of thumbs up on it?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking the trajectory from those first 4 games when they gave up 18 goals in 4 games, then everything, the team is the greatest team of all time. But really, I mean, do I feel like this team will be making positive steps and will finish 2 places higher next year? I think we'll have to wait until the offseason to see what happens there. I think that there are some really good players playing for the Loons, and I think they are not playing well as a team. They have not played well as a team throughout most of the season. You have Francisco Calvo, who was fantastic against the U.S. for Costa Rica last week, and he's been pretty good at times, sometimes great for Minnesota, but he's playing in a back line that keeps up giving up goals. And so you have other players. Christian Ramirez, he's injured right now, but he scored a ton of goals. You have these really bright players on the team, and somehow it's not yet working. So I think the jury is still out. It has been a fun season, at least. There's only been 1 0-0 draw at home, and the rest has been, even if we're giving up a bunch of goals, we're scoring a bunch of goals. So at least it's been fun most of the time, other than a few moments when we've all wanted to die.
Well, that's soccer fandom for you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to ask about Christian Ramirez, because he's a guy that when we sort of ask people for sort of maybe people are on the outside of the US men's national team but maybe deserve a look, that's a name that comes up a lot. I remember hearing his name around the Gold Cup as well, maybe as someone who should have been given a shot. So I want to ask you to put your neutral hat on and say that if you weren't so entwined with Minnesota United, would you believe from a neutral perspective that Christian Ramirez should be given a shot with the US national team? And if so, why or why not? Which is always the more interesting question.
Yeah, I think, I think it's bad that he was not included in the Gold Cup 40. Right. Because you have CJ Sapong, who's 29, scored about the same amount of goals, and Christian Ramirez, who you haven't really seen. Bring him in. Just look at him. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's ready to even. I think he still even has to prove himself over someone like Dom Dwyer. But I mean, Christian is a fantastic striker, fantastic player who. It's hard for me to say what level he could be for U.S. men's national team. I think right now he deserves a look. They should be bringing him in because he's not just he's not like a Wondolowski, but because he scores
not a goal poacher type.
Yeah, he scores a lot of goals, but most of them are not garbage goals. He scores from distance. He scores this year he started scoring with his head. He's got that great bicycle kick that people can go Google, and so he has a lot of really great goals, and he still has some parts of his game that really need to develop. But yeah, I love him as a player.
So could he be a target as well? Because I can't remember who the goal was against, but I specifically remember a goal where it's played into him with his back to goal, but he's at the top of the box, and he sort of holds it up, lays it off, then he turns and runs in behind, and someone puts it through the defence for him, and he runs on and scores. And I always love a player that can do that really quickly, but I wasn't sure if that was a regular thing where he's able to hold players off and hold the ball up, or if that was just a one-off.
That's a new part of his game, actually. So Christian, because of his size, people will describe him as a big player, and he's about 6'2", probably. He wants to play with the ball at his feet, and maybe it's a little bit like Josie, right? I mean, everyone thinks Josie's going to be this target guy. But Christian needs to learn to be more of a target, especially if he's going to be playing alone. And so he has developed that a little bit. This year he's had 2 or 3 moments where he really did a good job of, even when he's not scoring like that, he's just holding guys off and being more of a bother to his center backs, that's largely, whether it's his movement or holding players off, that's largely the part of his game that I think really needs to develop.
And forgive my ignorance, how old are we talking? Is he sort of early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s? 30s?
He's 20. Yeah, he's 25, I think.
Okay, so there is time to add some elements to his game.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
Let's focus on the positive first. Then I know that obviously it's maybe not the season you hope for in terms of making the playoffs, that kind of stuff. But what's been the high point of the Minnesota season so far?
Well, there were 2. There's been a couple home victories that I think were really key. The first was against Real Salt Lake. It was the first win in MLS. It was at home, and Wonderwall kicked in, and people were singing, and it was I'm getting goosebumps now. It was an amazing moment. Minnesota fans have always, even when we won the NASL a few years ago, we've always been a underdog team, and so kind of are able to never take winning for granted. And so the kind of Wonderwall celebration that happens at the end of every win was great to finally experience this year.
Wait, so this is new to me, and bear in mind I'm a child of 90s. I mean, I wasn't born in the 90s. I'm older than that, but I sort of was a teenager in Britain in the 90s. Oasis were my band. And I've heard you talking about Wonderball. I don't know what you're talking about. Is this a fan song that they use their Wonderwall song?
Let's go in the Wayback Machine. It's a tradition that started when our former assistant coach, who then became last year's head coach, a guy named Carl Craig, who is there's an article in Howler on the Howler website from a few years ago that was about him. He's a Geordie and a punk rocker, just a crazy dude, amazing guy. And he had this thing where he would try to psychologically stimulate players. He would spray scents on them and things like that. And one of the things that he started to do during the year when we won NASL in 2011, he started as they were going on this run at the end of the season, he started getting them to sing Wonderwall. And so then Wonderwall became this way to kind of encourage winning and celebrating, and then that turned into the fans singing Wonderwall, the Dark Cloud singing Wonderwall at the team when we won, and then there's a video of us winning a playoff game, and the team came over and sang it to the fans. It's this tradition that goes back to 2011, and it kind of got solidified this year where people decided, okay, let's only sing it when we win, because sometimes it would just be. There was no rules to it. It was just a big triumphant thing. So Wonderwall is now a big part of that, and a good chunk of the stadium sticks around and sings along when we win. Oh
wow! If I see that Minnesota are winning next time, I might try and hop on the fastest plane I can to get to the end of the game. I need Hyperloop to Minnesota so that when they're winning, I can be there to hear that song right at the end. One thing that I mean, one thing I learned after growing up was that kind of a lot of Oasis lyrics are borderline nonsense, though. So, like, how have they extracted meaning from Wonderwall? Or is it that it's like a blank slate and you can project whatever you want onto it, and it's easy to sing along to?
Yeah, I think it's meaningless. I mean, it's really
but
just
rousing,
a song.
Right? It's rousing nonsense.
Yeah, you can look at the lyrics of the chorus and kind of put generic meaning of us singing that to the team, but largely it's just a thing that you do, like so many things in soccer. It just happens, and then all right. F it. Let's just keep doing it. That was fun.
And it sounds to me like even if times have been tough on the field, it sounds like the fans have never really turned on the team, which is something I'm always a big fan of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's actually debates on when people feel it's appropriate, right? I mean, I've been a fan of the team for a while, and there's one game I remember, an Open Cup game from a few years ago, where I thought, oh, I need to boo them. This is just inappropriate. Like how terrible this was. And
did you?
And I did, but it was really. I'm a Minnesotan now, so I was really timid. I was just like, boo. That was bad. So, I mean, they lost to the Des Moines Menace, and they put in the worst performance I've ever seen. So. But yeah, the fans have, for the most part, really been behind it. And I think that there's players out there who have a real connection to the fans still. You know, Miguel Ibarra and Christian Ramirez and Brent Coleman are three of the NASL guys who are still with the team. And you know, even if Miguel has had kind of an average or mediocre return to the team and year in MLS, he's still someone that, you know, there's a song with his name of "We Are the Champions" of Miguel Ibarra, and people just love cheering for the guy because they know him and he's made a connection with fans.
I've always been interested in the mechanism that was used to get some of those NASL guys signed with what was, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe was technically an entirely new team, even though it looked very similar, right? Minnesota United FC, when they made the move from the NASL to Major League Soccer. So how did they go about picking up those? So it's Ramirez, Ibarra, and a third guy you mentioned who I'm sorry I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, Brent Coleman. He is a great story of a guy he's a local guy who, you know, everyone thought would be the fourth or fifth string center back. And, you know, as things fell apart at the beginning of the season, he made a start and he's been just amazingly stalwart. He's been, he's been a fixture in the side and he's been fantastic. There was also Ibsen, who is a very creative, used to play for Spartak Moscow and a couple other big clubs. So he's the central midfielder. He was from the NASL team. There's the two fullbacks who haven't played much at all. Justin Davis, Kevin Venegas, and then if any of those NASL players are going to listen to this podcast, they'll be mad. I think that's about it.
Let's call them et al.
Yeah, exactly. But so what happened for that is these guys were playing for the NASL team, and then at some point, once last August, once it became official that Minnesota United was in the league in MLS, then these guys signed separate contracts that, then they sign their MLS contract. They become employees of MLS once the whole switchover happens.
So there wasn't any sort of like weird draft or anything or allocation had to happen. You can just, if a guy's, I guess, a free agent, you can kind of just pick him up.
Yeah. Minnesota, however it worked, Minnesota was able to sign whomever they wanted from their own team.
Okay, that sounds good. But is that a special rule for expansion teams?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It's like an MLS maybe looks the other way kind of rule.
Yeah.
One thing I want to guess maybe hit on the negative a little bit. If you could get in a time machine and go back to, say, January, what's the one thing you would say to Adrian Heath, or is it Bruce Maguire or Bill Maguire? Mr. Maguire.
Bill Maguire. Bruce Maguire is du Nord from Twitter.
Yes, that's
it. So Bill Maguire, the owner, yeah.
Bruce Maguire's the real owner of Minnesota, but yeah, Bill Maguire owns the actual team. If you could go back in the time machine to January, what would you say to those two guys? Like, what would you warn them about or suggest that they do differently? And the answer can't be Demidov because we already know that.
No, well, can I make it bigger? I mean,
Yeah.
You got to go back to last October and tell them don't go to Scandinavia, because it's not just Vadim Demidov who will be everyone's favorite punchline for a long time, but I believe that there were 5 players who came out of that. Josh Gatt, a few of these guys, Bashkim Kadri, and all of them are gone except for Vadim Demidov, right? So we brought in these 5 players. They took up international spots, and some of them were terrible. Some of them were just not right now, needed time. But it was a big mistake, I think. I think that had the team turned toward MLS and tried to figure out what kind of deals can we get for players, like Ethan Finley, who just came in. He's a great signing. He's a great player. And I know they did try to get some players. They eventually got Sam Cronin, and they tried to get him before the season. But really, the focus on Scandinavians was a pretty big mistake that the team is still kind of recovering from, because they still have, Vadim Demidov makes $500,000. Right. And so they've got these guys on the books at times, and largely, I think it just, Demidov was also signed to be their captain, right?
Yeah.
He made 4 appearances. So,
just for anyone who doesn't know, Demidov is a central defender and started the season and was kind of really early on pinpointed as basically being too slow and not good enough, and a lot of the goals were coming. In those early defeats, he took a lot of the blame, rightly or wrongly. They can't all be his fault, but he certainly wasn't helping, and certainly not for the amount of money he was earning.
Right. I mean, largely it was because of his prominent role and the money.
Yeah.
He was scapegoated a bit because there was a lot of bad players around him. But yeah, he was the big signing, brought in to be the captain, and it was just a major flop, unfortunately.
So, did anyone explain the thinking behind looking to Scandinavia? Is it like because of this? Because there's some connection with the state of Minnesota, or was there some other reason? And also, has there been any sort of recognition / apology for that decision?
Yeah, there are a ton of Scandinavians in Minnesota, but the real reason was Scandinavian contracts end in December, right? So we were able to go there and pick up a lot of free agents, and they weren't all free agents, but get people. So because of the really tight turnaround of announcing in August and needing to have a team for the spring, they went to the quickest place where they thought that they could get some guys free. And, at times Scandinavian talent can be pretty interchangeable, but you don't have too many success stories of Scandinavian players in MLS.
Which is strange, actually, because you'd think it would make sense, right? I could imagine some Scandinavian centre-backs, some Swedes, Danes, Norwegians coming over to MLS and being very, very useful.
Yeah, I mean, but, you should ask your former guest, previous guest, Bobby Warshaw. He and I have talked about Vadim Demidov and some of these guys, and he said, they should have asked me. I can tell you about the Scandinavian leagues, and there's a lot of these guys who are, the game is just much different there. And so there's that. And the second part of your question was, has there been any apology or anything? Largely, the team is very quiet around these things, but there's definitely an admission that they got some things wrong. And I had a long interview on my podcast, the FiftyFiveOne podcast, last week with Dr. Bill McGuire, the owner, and we talked about these things. And both he and sporting director Manny Lagos talk vaguely around one of the problems that they had was that a lot of these players were signed on reputation and, some light scouting, and they need to now make sure anytime they sign someone that they have extensive contact with that person and they have on the ground scouting going on.
So more homework is what they're promising.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and part of it is a little bit understandable, right? They did have a quick turnaround, but some of it is just like, it was a little bit self-inflicted in that they could have signed a scout in anytime, a year before and said, your job is to put together a large dossier of people who we are going to, they could have done that. They chose not to.
So what's the hope then? I know you said you were hoping for sort of a more upward trajectory going into 2018. Is there anything specific that you'd like to see either at the end of this season or by the start of next season? Any specific things that will happen that will make you say, yes, we're on the right path?
I want to see what the next plan is, right? There's been a couple iterations of plans, and they've made some good decisions. The Sam Cronin trade was great. Ethan Finley trade was great. But in this offseason, we'll start to see, okay, what is the general plan here? We know that there's going to be a DP signed somewhere in the next year. What is that going to look like? And maybe it won't look like a coherent plan such as let's go to Scandinavia and sign everyone. But at least I want to look at the squad right now and look at the squad next year and think that half of the starters are now pushed to being bench guys who are fighting for a starting place, right? You want to see, and that hasn't always happened with the signings, even that have come within the season. There's been a lot of signings who have just been, another guy who can fight for a spot, not a bona fide starter.
Right. So, speaking of bona fide starters, Kevin Molino is obviously a big deal at the time. A lot of allocation money for him. What did you make of that move?
I think it was a great move. I think he's a great player. I think that he has been a little bit hot and cold this season, but he was very prominent signing because he was one of the first players who it was made known how much he was signed for, right? $600,000 in GAM, TAM, or whatever it was. And so that kind of
kickstarted the new economy, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And that raised eyebrows because we did know that Dax McCarty was traded for 400 GAM or TAM. And everyone's like, well, wait, Dax McCarty is, and I think that was a bit unfair, both because Dax now we see was very undervalued and Molino was probably about right. But I think that he's been a very good signing. The problem largely for him is that he's not a number 10, and Minnesota has no one in the number 10 role, and they're playing a tactical system that wants a number 10 role. So he should be out on the wing and cutting in. And so
that's how I think of him.
Yeah, we're asking him to play a role that he's not as good at. And so I think I think the team generally suffers for that reason.
Okay, are there any other Minnesota United topics that I haven't touched on? Because I'm always aware that there might be stories I don't know about that I'm not smart enough to ask about. So is there any sort of burning Minnesota United story right now?
I mean, we touched the agony and the ecstasy and Vadim Demidov and Christian Ramirez. So we kind of got it. But I think there is one final thing, which is that, Abu Dinladi was the first pick in the Super Draft.
Yeah.
And
Taylor's a big fan.
Yeah, he has a long way to go, but he's scored, I think, 5 goals this season, which Dr. Bill McGuire pointed out to me very gleefully that is the same amount of goals that Dom Dwyer has scored. And so, I think that he has, like I said, he's got a long way to go and develop, but he has been one of the best rookies this year. And I think that, 5 goals, even though he's only had probably 4 starts as a center forward, it's a pretty good tally. So I am very pleased that he's been able to come in because we have no depth in striker.
Am I right in thinking Dunladi's not American? Or has he represented another national team yet?
Yeah, he has not been called up, but he's Ghanaian.
So there's maybe a chance that eventually maybe he takes citizenship if Ghana don't notice in the next few years.
Yeah. I mean, there's always that chance, but I think Ghana may come knocking.
All right. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Wes, is The other reason that I read 55.One is that it's great for Minnesota United news, but then also you guys often break stories about the divisional alignments of the various leagues within the United States. And it's good that you guys do, because the official organizations do not break stories. They do not make any announcements until way after everybody basically knows, thanks to sites like yours. So last week, I believe, or maybe even early this week, you guys reported that NASL have been told they will not be receiving Division II status for next season.
Right. So the story is that just a week ago, the U.S. Soccer kind of got together and made this decision and told NASL, in part they told them a bit early because they wanted to give them opportunities to find, I think, creative solutions is the way it was expressed to me. And so earlier this week, we broke that story, and at the time it was extremely vague, right? I mean, we knew that that NASL had been told. NASL had obviously not come up with any sort of plan or response. Teams were barely able to respond, and part of it was you have a lot of things up in the air, and you do have some clubs like North Carolina FC who have had conversations with USL and may just simply jump ship and go to USL. But that's the general gist of this kind of crazy story.
And for those who don't know what happened this year, and again, this was reported late and it was announced after everybody had reported it, right, is that there was no official Division 3 in the United States. USL and NASL both had, I believe, provisional Division 2 sanctioning. So we had this weird, two leagues were at Division 2 of the pyramid. But there was also, from what I understood, a suggestion that it's not going to be that way forever, because that's kind of a weird setup to have. So as far as you understand it, is it that NASL will be given Division 3 status and USL will be given Division 2 status? Is it sort of has the order been set, or is there a sort of a long way to go in this story?
Yeah, there's still a long way to go. To take it back to the winter, NASL went through a crisis, lost a bunch of teams, and we thought it was going to be dead. But then it came back from the dead, and both USL and NASL were applying for the Division 2 status, and they had to, because neither of them are compliant with things like NASL didn't have enough teams, USL a bunch of their teams, some don't play in stadiums that are big enough, etc. They both
some play in stadiums that are too big as well.
Yeah, and they both had to submit basically, here's where we're out of compliance. Here's our elaborate plan for getting within compliance, right? Yeah. And at the time, there were some people who I talked to who were very familiar with it, and they felt very confident that NASL had an easier path toward compliance. And USL,
I can see that, right? Because teams like Indy 11 seem to have a really good setup. They what I think of as a proper Division 2 team, maybe larger in the future.
Yeah, and you had a couple teams. Now this year they announced 2 California teams, so you started to get this year also the Deltas started this year in San Francisco, and then next year there are 2 new California teams slated to start, and so you started to finally have the NASL footprint grow outside of basically the 30 teams they have in Florida. And so they, U.S. Soccer has not let USL know about their status, but I'm thinking that they will not knock USL as well. And so you had this one year where you have 2 Division 2s, no Division 3. Next year you have slated to begin is Peter Wilt of Chicago Fire and Indy 11 and all these things. He's starting the it's called NISA, and it's National Independent Soccer Association, I think. Yeah. And that's going to be Division 3. The next year, USL is going to start a Division 3 league, and so then you could have 3 Division 3s or 3 leagues in that division. And so,
wasn't the idea with Peter Wilt's league was that it would be sort of connected to NASL, and teams would eventually be promoted up and down between NISA and NASL?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, but that plan for Wilt's league is, that's like step 3 or 4, right? The first stage of Wilt's league is to put together a league that's fundamentally stable. And so, you have right now, as you've had for a while, I think, just absolute turmoil and craziness in the lower divisions. And in my mind, and I didn't finish an article for today, so it'll go out on Monday. But in my mind,
is that partly my fault? This interview?
Yeah, no. It was the fact that I have apparently things in my life that are not soccer. But it's negligence on the part of U.S. Soccer. They've created a pyramid that is not a pyramid, right? There's no. It's not like England. League 2 is slightly worse than League 1, right? There's nothing to say that a Division 3 team is slightly worse than a Division 2 team, other than, a Division 3 teams all have to play, have less stringent requirements on the stadium size and ownership wealth. So that's the real problem here, and we need finally U.S. Soccer to come in and come up with an actual solution, or an actual prescription for here's what we want U.S. Soccer to look like. And right now they're just basically responding to the latest, chaos and trauma to go on.
Yeah, they feel more like they're just inspectors to me. Like they'll just come in once or twice a year, sort of look around, tell you what's wrong, write you a waiver maybe, and then say, try and fix this. And do you know what I mean? Yeah, there's no long-term plan. They're not leading from the top. They're just sort of popping in now and again to taste the food and tell you what's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that's a perfect analogy, right? I mean, you don't want someone just to or even if you want to go without the inspector analogy, when I'm cooking with someone, I don't want them to come and taste it and go, oh, that needs this. It's like, well, why don't you just give me a friggin' recipe and tell me how this is supposed to be made? And we don't have that right now. And I think that NASL's problems are mostly self-inflicted, but once, and a lot of people think that once NASL goes away or something, if it dies, that suddenly a new era of peace will be ushered in. And I just think
I kind of lean towards that idea, but I think that's because in Richmond I'm in a USL town, so I sort of naturally have a USL bias. But you don't see that happening. If NASL does disappear, then you think it would be sort of less order than I was hoping for.
Exactly. I think that's because NASL started because there were a bunch of lower division owners who were like, hey, why don't we just be a little bit more ambitious and try to make really good, successful teams that aren't just, in this lower division league kicking around. And that will happen again, right? I mean, the more if MLS says it's going to cap at 28, which, I think we're all doubtful of, you're still going to have places like the Tampa Bay Rowdies are still, they're not content to be USL. They moved from NASL to USL because they thought it was a better path. And there's going to be lots of folks like that, and even newer clubs who will come in and say, well, why do we have to play Red Bull New York number 2 in front of 50 people? Why don't we play, why don't we do something better? And that's a problem. Those attitudes are completely understandable, and there's no way to address it because the U.S. Soccer has basically just kind of turned a blind eye and had this laissez-faire attitude toward the leagues and just be like, well, we'll see you next year when we approve you or reject you.
So my hope, I'm a long-term believer in hoping that promotion relegation could happen, because that would kind of, it won't solve all our problems and it might create new problems, but it will definitely sort of it will put a proper pyramid in place if we ever get there. And so what I'm hoping is that we do get some sort of order so that we have like an obvious Division 1, an obvious Division 2, an obvious Division 3, and that from there we can slowly, once everybody has accepted their place on the ladder, then those leagues can slowly start coming to agreements and working together to a point where one day there might be an agreement for, 3 up, 3 down.
I mean, that's a beautiful dream that you have. But I think that there are ways that promotion relegation may happen. But, it is going to take – it's never going to look like England or Spain or any of those. I mean, it will perhaps look. Lots of people have talked about the MLS 1 and 2, right? The MLS turns into 40 players. 40 teams, sorry, and then you have 2 divisions. And perhaps something like that could happen. But no matter what, I think there's going to have to be a real hard cap on teams, right, on the bottom of the pyramid. I think that they need to find some way that, because we have all these new NPSL teams, Kingston Stockade and all these that are popping up, and they're great, but we need to figure out a way that that we can do that without just having all these teams, and suddenly every guy with a few $1,000,000 is going to start a team, and it'll just be chaos if you just said, all right, we're going to have promotion and relegation. So there has to be some sort of way to kind of do that smartly, and I think we're still in way too much chaos in general to start thinking about that.
So, final thing I want to ask you about this, and again, this may be idealistic and a nice dream that I have, but is there any chance of a merger between USL and NASL, sort of on friendly or as near as friendly terms as possible?
I think that is one of the creative solutions that could be pursued. I think it would probably at this point happen. I mean, it happened before, right? 2010, NASL and USL were forced by US Soccer to play in the same division, and they had different conferences, but then they met in the final. Yeah. And so that something like that could happen. I think it may be something like USL is forced to absorb these teams. And give them entry without paying a minimal fee or something. I think that might be one of the solutions, because right now I think NASL just has had so many blows to it that you've only got a couple owners there in Jacksonville, New York, and Miami who are, I think, really, really fighting for it. And that's 3 teams. So maybe they'll be the only 3 who have their own little non-sanctioned league.
So this is probably a story where you need to follow Wes on Twitter, follow FiftyFiveOne on Twitter, check FiftyFiveOne, maybe follow Nipun and Kartik as well, just to get the extra news. And
I would say also Neil Morris is another guy in North Carolina. I'd say those guys are very plugged in, and there are not many people who follow NASL and get you the news from it. And so I think that all of them do a great job of helping us keep track of crazy stories like this.
I'll put links to all those Twitter accounts in the show notes so people can sort of keep an eye on this, because I think this is a thing that people are deeply interested in but have a hard time finding information, because it's not always sort of announced and reported in the traditional ways, shall we say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Anything else on FiftyFiveOne that you want to tell us about, Wes?
No, we cover everything in Minnesota and the north, and then obviously these big NASL stories. So if people are interested in those things, then they definitely should check us out.
All right, well, Wes, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today, even if it sort of cut into your article writing time.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.